Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you had a good and satisfying lunch. On the topic of lunch, our panel discussion today is on the topic of food security. By way of introduction, my name is Omid Kassiri. I'm the managing partner for McKinsey East Africa, and I lead our African agriculture practice. I'm told that God made very few perfect heads. The rest he covered with hair. So as you look, thank you. All right. The setup is I'm going to present a few slides. This is not meant to be a big presentation. We have a few slides to just set the stage on this big topic of food security. And then we're joined by our panel of distinguished speakers from the private sector, the public sector, financiers, who we will have a few targeted questions at, and then we'll open it up to the audience to hopefully have a very engaging discussion. So I'm going to run through this fairly quickly. Again, just to set the stage, I think everyone is acutely aware. We've heard so much about it. We heard about it in today's opening discussion. The magnitude of the food security challenge escapes me sometimes. If we define moderate food insecurity as adults and children who often have to skip a meal, and extreme food insecurity as where they skip multiple meals and have far fewer than they should in a week, we're talking about 85% of Africa's population experiencing moderate to severe food insecurity. It is a huge social challenge. It is a challenge of social justice. It has massive social and economic ramifications on the continent. Just by way of example, the droughts in Kenya that we had last year, which is where I'm from, at one point in November, we had up to 35% of school children not going to school on account of hunger. Not only is that a huge injustice, we can pour as much money into jobs and talk about productivity as we want. But when children do not go to school, are physically stunted in their early childhood, what hope do they really have of being productive contributors to their families and society 10, 20 years down the line? So it really is, in my view, a core fundamental challenge that needs to be addressed at multiple levels. This is exacerbated by what we see a widening gap between production. This is just looking at wheat on the continent versus the demand. And we can see production has, for the most part, stayed fairly flat. Demand has more than doubled over the last 30 years. And, you know, I sit in Kenya, I think, okay, well, maybe other countries have gotten it right. We do not have, at least when it comes to wheat, a single country that is producing a surplus. This conversation is about food security, not just production. The issue of producing a surplus is not just about how do we get the yields right. That's one of the elements, it's one of the drivers. But there are other drivers as well, such as if you did have a country producing a surplus, a landlocked country, say, how are they going to export it to other places? There are disincentives in some places to producing a surplus. And so the problem is multifaceted and needs to be addressed in a multifaceted way. If asked the question, what do you think has a bigger impact on food production globally? If you had to choose between geopolitical shocks and climate change, we'd get a range of answers. Geopolitical shocks, for the most part, always have a negative impact on production. We've experienced that in Russia and Ukraine. You know, when there's turmoil in the Red Sea due to piracy, then food supplies get affected. Climate shocks, is no surprise, also has a massive impact on productivity in most places. In some places, it actually increases productivity, as you can see in the green, where temperatures rising actually makes certain places better for growing. It has a real material impact. For instance, again, using Kenya, for the longest time, we've been a pretty major exporter of horticulture. In the seasons when Morocco and Egypt cannot grow and export because of the winter. Now that their winter is shrinking, the season for growing in Kenya is shrinking. And so it's becoming increasingly competitive for private businesses. Again, just to put it in perspective and make it visual, one can really see the impact of the geopolitical shocks. This is a food price index. It's not a surprise, but it is, this is a chart that affects the hungry people on the streets of Africa. This is the chart that describes why food insecurity grows so significantly across the continent. In many of our countries where people spend up to 50% of their disposable income on food, under normal situations, when prices go up like this, they either spend a lot more on food or just eat a lot less. And this is really quite a pressing challenge across the continent. Climate change, unfortunately, our continent is not one which will benefit that much from climate change. The very red countries are where you would expect a 50% decrease in yields as a result of a 2-degree increase in climate change. Juxtapose this with a continent which has the fastest growing population and will have the largest population in the next 2 decades. And so, how do we think about this? Again, very high level, and I really look forward to the details that our panelists will share with us. But one is grow more and find a way to store it. To have a 2 to 3x increase in grains, we would need 8x more fertilizer. I think our colleagues from OCP will share that this is not just about spreading out fertilizer, but being quite thoughtful about how we do it. Look forward to hearing about that. An 8 billion investment in basic storage. Very keen to hear from IFC and FMO what it would take for that to happen. We need far better seeds of all sorts. And we do need to take a look at our posture towards technology and seeds. And we need a lot more investment in irrigation, particularly to mitigate the challenges of climate change. These are just a few. As you all know, the ag and food ecosystem is a complex one. The different pieces all need to come together. The second is to learn and develop the infrastructure and the policies to allow better trade, both from abroad and regionally as well. We don't do a great job of it. I know that efforts have been made in East Africa, for instance, to develop a regional food balance sheet that would allow countries to have a sense of what amount of storage of basic foods do they have, and to proactively trade with one another. And finally, for the most vulnerable, once you have the food in the country, how do you make sure it gets to the most vulnerable in the most efficient, effective way, when these countries don't have huge budgets to subsidize food to the extent that's required? We have to get a lot smarter about how we do it. So I hope that at a pretty quick glance gives us a sense of the challenge of food security that we're facing on the continent. So with that, I'll ask our esteemed panelists to come and take the stage, and we'll just do a quick introduction and jump into the questions and answers. Thank you. And we do have 2 French speakers in the panel. So do we have a translator? Do we have translation? Yeah? Great. Everyone who needs the translation, I presume you have your mics. Maybe starting from the far end, if we can just do a quick 2 lines introduction, your name, the organization you're from, that'd be very helpful. Sorry, yeah, I think you need the mic.
Merci. Merci à vous de nous recevoir et de...
Thank you for giving us the floor to share our point of view that I think will probably be at some point the same. So we have the CEO, Managing Director, which is a group that is more into agro-industry. And they know what, when we're talking about climate change today.
For having me. My name is Michael. I'm the CEO of FMO. FMO is the Dutch Development Bank. We run a portfolio of about 15 billion worldwide. And we do only 3 sectors, where most of our peers do basically everything. We do financial industries, renewable energy, and of course, agriculture. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Mohamed Hajiji. No, in fact, I'm representing them, and we have the same first letters of the name, but I am Habiba Moutaqi. I am responsible strategy, marketing, and sales at OCP Group, the first producer and exporter of fertilizers and farmer solutions in the world. And happy to be here to discuss effectively this key challenge of the continent, which is food security and sovereignty. Thank you.
Bonjour et je suis très heureux d'être.
Good morning. I'm really happy to be here. I'm Félix Lama. I'm the Minister of Agriculture and Breeding of the Republic of Guinea. 13 billion of people and also of land. And here we have the specificity of having 3 natural regions or 4 natural regions with microclimate in all of those different regions. So it's a pleasure to share with my colleagues here your experience that we do in the sector of agriculture and breeding. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Sergio Pimenta. I'm with IFC. I'm the Vice President for Africa. We are very present in this continent and investing in a number of sectors, and agriculture and agribusiness are absolutely key sectors in our strategy. It's a large part of our portfolio and our interventions, both on the investment side but also on the advisory side. So I'm very, very honored and pleased to be with this distinguished panel members. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. Is this working? Does it work? Yeah, great. Okay. If I may start with Honorable Minister Felix, we had a discussion about whether they're referred to as honorable or not in Guinea, and he said it doesn't really matter. As a Minister of Agriculture, when you think about food security every morning, what is the first thing that comes to your mind? What is the biggest challenge that you have?
Merci. En tant que pouvoir public, pour nous.
Thank you. When we hear about food security, is to make sure that our population and make sure that there is an availability at every time and also access and also in a sustainable way and also the purchasing power to a production that is safe and that will help to realize the activities and develop in the country. So for us, it's actually to have the accessibility and availability, and more important, the sustainability of the access to the food within your country. So this is what, as public power, this is what food security means for us. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Later going, so forgive me for that. Madam Habiba, you were, OCP was at the Fertilizer and Soil Health Summit in Nairobi last week. The declaration that came out was not just about how do you increase fertilizer application on the continent. What were your main takeaways from the event?
Exactly. So OCP participated to that event. So even some people came directly from Nairobi to Kigali over 2 days. Honestly, it's finally not only about fertilizer use. We may be sad because we are a producer of fertilizers, but honestly, we were very glad to see that it's now a holistic approach that is promoted, that is discussed. Because it's not only about fertilizer, because it's one puzzle, it's one component of the whole approach that need to be discussed, need to be given as a solution to that continent. So they talk about sustainable approach with environmental and social impacts. And this is really a key for sustainable development of the continent. One or two main points that effectively were very key and very emphasized by many stakeholders and many people that discussed during these days this problematic is effectively to enable Africa to produce itself and to increase local production in Africa. So they give a figure that to increase 30% of local production and distribution. And this is for me the key solution to have really availability and affordability of fertilizer, but also any agri-inputs to the continents. And also another point that we need also today to leverage on data and innovation to have this right recommendation to the smallholder farms. It's really pity to see same smallholder farms using the same fertilizer for 100 of years. Soil is degrading, the climate is changing. So we cannot ask the same smallholder farms to keep the same usage and the same practices over time. So the idea effectively is to enable 70% of these smallholder farms with this new recommendation, with these new practices. And this is really an engagement of all the stakeholders, so public and private, and also all the research institutions to make this happen, to give that recommendation, to create that recommendation, and to make it available to all. So for me and for OCP and also all the people that were there, so it's a way that we are not repeating the same messages. We are really pointing the causes, not only the same one, as you said, not only fertilizer, this is the cause, or the quality of seeds, but this absence of holistic and collaborative work that need to be done at a given moment, and I think it's now that should be done.
If I may just ask, have you seen this collaboration actually happening? I mean, it's a nice idea.
Yes.
Have you seen it? Is it working anywhere?
This is today why we are combining us here today, because there is a representative of public sector, private, and also finance. Today, and I think we will go through it in the coming question, there is challenge for our continents. We are all aware, but there is hope. I think at a given moment, we need to de-risk or even take the risk to invest in that continent. Today, there is some proof of concepts, there is some pilots, but the challenge is really to how to scale it up. But I think having that on mind and working together, today there is some limitation. I know that you had your own experience in farming in different countries. The challenge is more to scale up, because the ideas are there. There is some proof of concepts, and the scale up will be the challenge, but this is why we have investment partners and finance, because this is where we need to catalyze investments to scale up these ideas.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Do you allow me to react to that? So I fully agree. And the technology is there. The thing is, the money is also there. And I think scaling up, the biggest risk we see, or the biggest challenge we actually see in our daily practices, is education of farmers, making them change. And so the money for the transition, we can talk about it later, that is there. But if we are able to scale up the education of the farmers to adjust their practices, which they've been for generations and generations, then we'll be able to solve the problem. And the money we will provide.
Thank you. So since you took the mic, you said the money is there. You have players in the ecosystem. How are you making that money available? What instruments are you using practically to get the money out? And what is stopping you from getting more out?
Yeah, so there are a couple of ways we get the money out. Traditionally, we work with kind of microfinance organizations like Agora in Zambia that then finance smallholder farmers and others. That's kind of the traditional way. What we more and more do is we finance also large banks, and we stimulate them by ring fencing the money for agriculture. And then we're talking, for instance, about Zanaco in Zambia, but also Access Bank in Nigeria. But then yesterday I was with the CEO of INM Bank here in Rwanda. So that's another channel. A third channel we use is also the producers. So for instance, Neumann Cafe Group, which is a large coffee trader, they have a farmer financing scheme that we back up. And we see that throughout the value chain, the large producers, the traders, they need to take their part. And they more and more see that. And we're more than willing to help them with that. And of course, luckily there are many more agtech companies that provide financing. For instance, Farmerline is a company that we work with. So we see a lot of different options. Now the question is, what is stopping us from scaling up? We see that these companies, also Babangona in Nigeria, have quite difficulties to kind of really scale it up. We try to bring practice from India. That is in some elements a little bit further down the road, but it's really difficulty. And again, the problem that I try to lay out, education of farmers, you know, of course, and they're also there, the techniques are there. You have the example farm and you train the trainer and you take them there, but still switching that, I mean, again, the money is there. So we are more than willing to work with any party here that thinks that they can help us scale up the smallholder farmer finance in any way.
Thank you. Great. Madam Rita. Morocco is one of the few countries in Africa that really has achieved a tremendous transformation of its agriculture sector over the last 10 or 15 years. As a business person, what are the lessons from Morocco that you would share with other African governments, bearing in mind we have a minister in the audience? From a business lens, what advice would you give to other African countries from what we've seen in Morocco?
Si vous permettez.
If you allow me, I will go back on the word lesson. For me, I don't think it's an appropriate word. I would like better to use sharing. This is the spirit that the king of Morocco, in his concern for food security in Africa, decided to share with, I would say, through three group, which is the first is the CP. The second is the Ministry of Agriculture that is in charge of the public authority. We had a lot of them. We had the Green Generation and the Green Morocco project, and we have the Ministry of Foreign Affairs that is making sure that things are being done the way they're supposed to. I think the cooperation South-South should find its place in the fight against not for the fight, but for food security, the fight for food security. Today, we are really impacted with the drought in Morocco. As you all know, when we talk about sharing of experience, as you mentioned earlier, I think we all need to share our experience. We all need today to have access on the training for the use of the technology. Technology has to play an important role to anticipate, because governing is always anticipating. So I think it will be really useful in terms of agriculture, using all the current technology, train engineers, technicians, and all the employers, all the workers in the agriculture sector, and also the technicians. I think this is my approach, this is my vision. And then I would also say that in terms of philosophy, we have to be resilient today to be in agriculture, and it's also vital to stay. It's vital to look for funds. It's vital to really create awareness for financial institutions so they can participate in those activities that are the basis and the source of the maintenance of life on this earth, whether we like it or not. And medicine as well, science also are those things that we need to maintain a good living. And also we have to look at the cost of those commitments. They have to be reasonable, not only for the people receiving those loans, but to those for the finalization of those loans. And that should actually benefit everyone. So this is the short message that I can give. This is what come into mind. I don't know if I answered your question or if I made a diversion. I don't know.
I had two questions I'd written down for Sergio, but with the announcement made today that you're looking to significantly increase your equity investments on the continent, which is very exciting. I'll maybe combine them. What types of projects on the continent get you most excited, and what are the structural changes that you need to see on the continent to enable you to spend, to double your investments on the continent?
So, first of all, thank you again for having me on the.
Donc merci de m'avoir sur le panel. Merci pour vos deux questions. Ce qui m'excite en termes de projets sur le continent est une très longue liste.
Well, I think what excites me the most in what IFC can do with many of the partners that are here on the panel with me is when we go beyond the project and we go on the, when we talk about agriculture, when we look at the value chain, and that our interventions have an impact that improves the value chain from the beginning to the end. And this is an approach that we've been developing more and more. We've done it across the continent in different commodities, in different countries, where instead of just saying, okay, we're going to go and finance one food transformation plant or one production of commodity, we really work with partners to make sure that we are helping the value chain develop itself, meaning from the farmers to the fork. And within that development, we also try to push that the added value stays in the continent or is increased in the continent. So the more food transformation you can have on the continent, it's better for the environment, it's better for the economy, it's better for the people. So it's really the approach that we're trying to have to really improve the capacity of the continent to create value in different countries and then develop an entire value chain. In order to do that, I mean, to your second question, I think I would refer to the slide that you put earlier in your presentation, which I think really identifies the different areas where we need to focus if we really want to make a difference, if we really want to move things on the agricultural space in Africa. And and we can't just say, oh, I'm going to focus on transport and logistics, but I'm going to forget the quality of seeds, or I'm going to just improve trade, but forget about training of farmers, right? I think we have to do everything. And that's what sometimes can seem a bit challenging. But, and I think we heard it from some other panelists, different players, different entities can help in different stages. And if we can coordinate, I think that's where we have to maximize the impact. What's very clear for me is that, what IFC can do is one thing, what the governments can do is another thing, what private sector companies can do is a third thing, and then the other DFIs. But all of us together, it's much bigger than the sum of the parts. So it's really that's a part of what I think we should be working on. And then to go back to your point on equity, I think the reason we really want to push on equity is because we feel that this is an area where in Africa, like in other emerging markets, but in Africa in particular, we see that there is, this is where the gap probably is the biggest. Someone was mentioning earlier, you're mentioning, right, whether there is financing, there's not financing. There is financing in Africa, but the financing tends to be more on the debt side. So we need more players on the equity side. And of course, equity is more risky. We need projects and companies that are with better governance, with better environments and social standards, that are more ready to absorb equity, that are ready also to open up the capital. But on our side, and this is what we heard from our managing director this morning, he made this announcement, we are going to step up on equity because we know it's more risky, but this is our mandate, is to help the development, and this is the tool that we're going to use. So and in the agricultural space, I think it's really spot on because we have a number of players that have the capacity of transform these economies in Africa, but they need capital. So let's help them and do that.
Thank you. There will be a chance for the audience to pose questions to our panelists. Maybe just one or two more. I'm being cognizant of time. Mr. Felix, if you were in a room with your fellow ministers of agriculture and you were having a very honest conversation with each other, what would you tell your fellow ministers that all of you could do a lot better?
Très bien.
So here's what I will tell them right away. Today, Africa represents a third of the population globally. And the African demography, the population of Africa is increasing. And so I think it's something to consider, particularly when it comes to countries in the south of the Sahara. We realize that there is even more increase of the population, and these are youths. And of course, our soil is rich. Our soil is great for agriculture, so we need to take that into consideration. Obviously, we are facing the brunt of climate change, and currently this has an impact on productivity and production when it comes to agriculture. There is also conflict, which also exacerbates the impact when it comes to food security. And so, as a public authority, it's our responsibility to ensure that our population has access to quality food at all times, but also we need to ensure that we are able to set up regulations, laws, plans that could allow all the stakeholders, be they from the private sector or just farmers or smallholder farmers, to be able to cultivate. And so, as far as I'm concerned, laws are important. The legal framework is also important. I listen to some actors in the private sector who also need the insurance or the assurance that they can invest in livestock in Africa. And so we need to establish the kind of legal framework that can help them to progress. We also have financial actors. Your presentation demonstrated, for instance, the example of Guinea. We have around 600,000 tons of rice, which we import per year, whereas we have 13 million of arable land. So how is it that we are not able to produce these 600,000 tons? And it's possible. So we just have to go towards smart agriculture that can enable us to take into account the impact of climate change to continue to ensure food security for our populations. And this would obviously require investment, so we would need the support of our technical and financial partners to build the capacities of smallholder farmers. But especially, we would need to attract funding from private sector and encourage them to invest instead of always importing. We have fertile land which is available and which requires investment, but we need to create the right environment. There is also the land mapping, which is important. And so if we don't have laws which guide all that, I think it will be challenging. We should also be able to handle that so that they can be able to act in this environment. But most especially as Africans, we need to create an entire value chain to achieve this. And when it comes to investment, we need to ensure that they are not focused on factors that are not important, but we need to focus on factors that have more value for us when it comes to food security. When it comes to Guinea, for instance, it would be in terms of rice, in terms of cassava, or yam, for instance. But we would have to choose the right items and avoid being all over the place. We need to focus on what is important for our countries and come up with clear plans in order to achieve food security. Of course, food security cannot be achieved in the absence of handling three issues, which is handling water. We cannot be in agriculture without focusing on water. Second, we need to also focus on energy. We need to be able to have access to energy. So I think water, energy, agriculture are really key to help us to achieve food security. We need to have proper irrigation methods, and we need to be able to use inputs which are good, but which would not put pressure on our soils, because of course it's great to use fertilizers and other things, but we have to avoid using chemical fertilizers. I think that increasingly we need to encourage the use of organic fertilizers so that we avoid degrading the quality of the soil. So we need to take into account some of these aspects. There is also mechanization, which is important in agriculture. We need to arrive at that. Somebody spoke about technology as well. We cannot actually disregard technology, especially when we are aware that climate change can be anticipated with some meteorological methods that can help us to kind of evaluate the weather, and this can help us to actually examine the implementation of our activities. And so this is what I would advise my colleague in the public sector. I want to say that it is possible to feed the entire world here from Africa. We have the lands, we have the human resources, we also have the necessary capacities. I think it's an issue of will, and we need to be able to address this to ensure that future generations are able to live in a continent which has which enjoys full food security. Thank you.
Really appreciate the perspective. Habiba, when we were speaking earlier, you mentioned some reasons. You mentioned some reasons why governments make it difficult for you to make the right investments. So in a way, from a private sector side, it would be great to hear in your line of business in fertilizer, what is it government to do to enable you to make these investments?
Thank you. Effectively, I was expecting to come before this question or after, but effectively there is a global link between the two, because the private without public or vice versa, it's not possible. And I am happy because I found some answers on the answer of His Excellency the Minister of effectively today how the public sector can help the private sector to invest more, to be more incentivized, to promote and to do what he needs to do to develop the agriculture value chains. Effectively, you talk about how I said the governance, the policies, and so on. But there is also the protection, because today you talk about importing rice elsewhere and we have the potential and possibility to produce it locally. This is effectively because we enable the importation from elsewhere, because there will be also this question of competitiveness. So work with the private sector, engage them in the decision and so on, and also protect them. It's also a key element to have this common strategy and common ambition, combining all the efforts. So this is my first point, or the challenge that honestly today the private sector is facing and maybe disabling to scale up do a lot of things. This is the fragmentation of the agricultural sector, not only about the inputs, but also about the output. And sorry to say, it's sometimes unpredictable intervention of the government. Just some rumors, for example, in the market about some importation from elsewhere can really create some uncertainties in the market and disable the private sector to take the right decision to bring the product at the right moment and so on. So this uncertainty sometimes it's not helpful to the development of the sector. So some joint work and really also involvement of the both sides, private to the public, for me is a key element that need to be, how I said, enhanced in Africa. I will not talk about finance. I believe and I heard that finance is there. It's only about how to catalyze it, how to de-risk the investment. This is today the key question. And how to de-risk it is really to prove some concepts, prove that it's feasible, and also, how I said, work in a manner that catalyze itself the investment. So the private sector is willing to take that risk to catalyze investment, but we need to start off some proof of concepts. I will add only the last points. Today, effectively, some challenges is also we have resources, but today when we want to hire people, it's sometimes very hard in some countries. So effectively, investing in human capital, in education, for us is key. So we heard this morning some examples of universities that do a lot. So we need really a huge investment on education. So we have the right people that have these three pillars that we heard this morning: leadership, governance, and the third one is also a key for any prosperity in the continent.
Thank you very much. Cognizant of time, maybe just one or two more questions. Michael, you are invested across the world, LATAM, Africa, Asia. How do you think differently about investments in agriculture in Africa versus other sectors in Africa or outside of Africa?
The great thing of investing in agriculture is that we can fight both climate issues as well as fighting inequality and poverty. And sometimes people forget it, but this is a sector where we can do both, and that's fantastic. And at the same time, we found out that in our research, every new job costs about 3,000 dollars of investment only. And that is in agriculture, and that's the lowest across the sectors that we see. And that number of 3,000 is even lower in Africa. So the investment for kind of any new job in agriculture in Africa is the lowest across the continents and across the different sectors. So for us, it's from that point, and if you saw, well, your own slides, I mean, if you talk about the impact of climate change in which continent, well, it was super red. It was very clear. So there's a clear need and there's a clear opportunity. And I also want to applaud IFC for doubling the equity investment, because indeed equity is an issue. And then it's also an issue of finding these bankable projects. And that's also where IFC is, what I understood, called upstream. It's what we call market creation, because we see a need for more entrepreneurship. And then we get back to the youth point again in Africa, because there's a huge potential and there's a need for that potential. So how great can the opportunity be? Now let's please capture it. So for us, Africa stands out among the continents because of the opportunities that are kind of even bigger. Now the risks are there. You just mentioned de-risking, which is indeed needed. And we see de-risking on one end due to governments that can, political stability, security, and so on. But the de-risking also needs to be done in the financial sector. Government can help by putting in first losses, but also that can be done by private foundations. We launched at COP last year a 1 billion fund, $1 billion US, together with an investor, Allianz from Germany and a couple of other investors, because there's a MacArthur Foundation in the US that provides 25 million first loss. So with 25 million first loss only, we are able to leverage $1 billion into these sectors just from a small de-risking effort. And that also makes it super attractive to really, really get going. But then the opportunities need to be there. And again, the farmers need to be willing to change their practices. If we can get all these wheels, and that's the complexity of the puzzle, I mean, all these elements need to be in place. And that's why it's taking so long. There was also the discussion like, hey, why in 10 years haven't it not changed that much? Well, it takes a lot of time, and we need, I mean, the situation would have been way worse if we would not have done it. So we need to kind of keep going. And a couple of elements are now, I think, really coming into place that makes me hopeful for the future, especially for Africa. But still, a lot of hard work needs to be done.
Thank you very much. I'd like to open it up to the audience if there are any questions to any of the panelists. We have Mike.
Now, don't be shy. Somebody needs to ask the first question.
Maybe while people think about their questions, I'll just pose one more. Let's keep it short so that we have time for the audience. Oh, actually, I see Ayodeji.
Thank you very much. It's to the point on, blended financing. How are we seeing this movement of merging different risk type of capital? Is it something that is progressing? It's worked quite well in some sectors, but when we look at agriculture, I think it's still the grant givers give the grants and the capital guys deploy the capital. Is there more effort to kind of push more blended financing approach?
Sergio, you want to take that one first? Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Look, thank you. It's a very good question on blended finance. I think it's been an instrument that, and I know FMO is doing the same. We all deploying because we see that in order to have more impact, we need to go to places where commercial financing is not getting there anymore. And I think it's particularly true on agriculture, because we tend to think about other sectors, but on agriculture, agribusiness, particularly true, because if you go to some of the value chains in some of the markets where actually the aggregators, the companies that are building the value chain, they're relatively small. And so when you want to do something a little bit more structured, more complicated, where you want to link with farmers and so on, the fixed costs for doing it end up being a bit heavy. So with blended finance, you are able to really do that. I mean, the IFC, before we really scaled up our blended finance tools, we had an awful acronym. Sorry, it's GAFSP. It's a global. You might know that facility was a global facility that allowed us to start blended finance in agriculture. So with this type of instruments, we can really help unlock interesting value chains. If I can just give one example, I was recently in the north of Senegal, on the Senegal River Valley, where we have financed the company on the onion value chain. The onion value chain might not seem like a big value chain, but it's actually creating employment for tens of thousands of people. And with one small investment, we put an amount of funding, which is a few $1 million. We were able then to link that to the groups of women farmers that produce the onion that then gets dried at that plant and then gets either sold in the markets in Senegal, in West Africa, and then exported. But this would not have been we would not have do that without an element of blended finance to it. So I really feel that this is one of the sectors where blended finance has a lot of meaning.
And you see the de-risking opportunity, for instance, with the first loss, as mentioned, but we see other structures evolving. So we leverage a guarantee project, which is called Nazira, where we allow a bank to get in there, and we cover a lot of the additional risk, because financing smallholder farmers is still seen as quite risky. So there are a couple of these blended finance constructions that have been there for a while, but I think there is now a real uptick, and that's great because there's more appetite to do it, and that is going to potentially be a serious difference maker.
Je voudrais juste, en tant que...
So as a Minister of Agriculture, I wish to also provide some answers. As a government, we are increasingly moving towards blended financing. Of course, these helps technical and financial partners to kind of minimize the risk, which we are referring to. So you would realize that for some projects and programs that we are implementing, especially when it comes to Guinea, where, for instance, the state contributes to the tune of, let's say, 15 to 20%, regardless of the structure of the project. And this actually helps technical and financial partners. And this actually demonstrates the will of the state to move towards undertaking this project. That is the first thing. Second, as a government. So I'm sharing the experience of Guinea. So we have a fund to develop agriculture, which enables us to support producers and farmers rather, sorry. You know, usually in Africa, we kind of focus on subsistence farming. And so there is a need when it comes to food security to help smallholder farmers to support themselves so that they are able to continue being food secure. And so we provide agricultural equipment, when it's tractors and so on and so forth. I think it's also important to support them because they do not have the financial resources needed to, for instance, purchase a tractor which may cost $25,000, whereas a big company can actually have access to this equipment and be able to use a grant system to let them have access. So, for instance, in our program, we kind of make sure that this equipment is available for the farmers. And this helps the rural population to have access to these inputs to be able to ensure food security. But there is also a very key aspect to this. Of course, I'm still sharing our experience in Guinea. Sometimes it's not really an issue with production for Africans. Sometimes the production is available, but the challenge is that we are unable to connect the market. Or sometimes also, we realize that during the various transformation units, we don't have the means to purchase the product from our farmers. And so I think it's very important to take that into account. Because when we have the needed funding, we can be able to resolve this. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Mine are just two questions. One is probably for the minister on the intervention that we can make to ensure that farmers are also benefiting from this business. Talk about the business, eventually involve farmers. But when you go around, you still find farmers are not directly benefiting from this business. Maybe the second one, go to the financing part and how we brand this business. If you look at, you talked about equity, but when you look at different documentations that are being submitted, applying for grants, most of their cover page portrays a disparate image of a farmer from a village. Is that how we need to brand that? So we talk about inclusiveness, equity. What kind of interventions can we put in place to ensure that that also reflects beneficial business as we talk? Thank you.
Merci, c'est une très belle question.
Thank you. It's a great question. Very quickly, my advice will be that there is a need to organize. This is very important. As farmers, there is a need to come together. There is also the need to be in organizations and groups, because as far as we are concerned, we support organizations, farmer groups, because these groups are able to implement their own projects with the support of the state. But all the smallholder farmers, I think it's important for them to come together. That is the first point. Second, I think that we need to get used to come up with projects. So we should have our business plans that government can support. So for instance, with our Agriculture Development Fund, we will not just support one farmer because this farmer has a project, but it's important to have an entire project. We need to be able to know how to develop a project and how to come up with a project. And of course, do that through farmers groups and with the support of technical and financial partners. I think that we can achieve a lot. And so with that kind of framework, we can be able to support rural farmers and ensure that they are able to implement the activities and to have the expected outcomes. And so my advice is that if you want to take advantage of funding, be it from the state or technical and financial partners, it is important to organize.
Thank you. Maybe time for one or two more questions. We have?
But I'm not sure if the second question was addressed. So I don't know, but I did not really get the question, so I have a hard time answering it. I don't know, Sergio, if you got the question, because it was around the equity question, but.
Would you mind repeating your question?
Sure. For the equity part, you just mentioned about it. I talked about how do we brand this business. In a couple of documentation we make, you find that the cover pages on, with images that portrays a farmer deep in the village, probably the dress code and all that. Eventually, it communicates different content on what we want to do when we want to push this business further. So do we keep that, or we want to make it sexy? Look at this building. People are smart, but when we come to documentation, we are putting images that really discourage even farmers or even other business to invest in that. How do we address that? Thank
you.
So let me share an example. So before being Minister of Scientific Research and Innovation, prior to being Minister of Commerce, this person was already in the field of agriculture. The Minister of Trade. Can you please rise? Please tell me whether this lady is sexy in quotes. So she's always been like that prior to being a minister. I think that, of course, we have to make agriculture sexy in quote because most of our population is youthful. So we have to make it attractive. But I think that we need to be organized. We need to be well structured because it is the only way that through the national development budget or through external funding, the state can support and you can have access to this kind of support so that you can be sexy businesses in quotes.
We are unfortunately running out of time. So I apologize for anyone who had outstanding questions. Maybe just in the last minute, I'll recap some of the main messages I heard. One is that there is a huge and growing need, a dire need, and that we are falling short as a continent on our basic mandate of ensuring food security. And that it is very possible for it to get worse unless we do things quite differently. The second message, however, is that there are players who are willing to arise to fill that gap. We've just heard the money is there. The money is there and people are innovating in terms of how they deploy the money. We heard FMO speak about how it works through companies that in effect aggregate the small farm holder. You spoke of Farmerline, you spoke of Babangona. Deji is very upset that you didn't mention AFEX. But these are entities that in effect aggregate on behalf of a very fragmented market. And then we heard about commitments being made to fill gaps. You spoke about also how to really mobilize this money is through collaboration. And the example of MacArthur using a $25 million first loss to unlock $1 billion, I think that was a perfect example of the collaboration that you spoke about. However, to unlock all of this, we also heard about the need for creating the right business environment, for creating stability of policy, and having smart policy that enables the localization. The localization of fertilizer production, for instance, that you spoke of, will not happen unless we're creating an environment. When I had spoken to Madam Rita earlier, she'd spoken about, I had asked her earlier, you're a big holding company, you've invested in North Africa and outside of Africa, but not in sub-Saharan Africa. Why? And sorry, we didn't have time to get into it, but you said the biggest challenge and the human capacity needed to build. So we need the environment in which these enablers can unlock the sector. That's overall the message that I heard. I want to thank all of you for your time. Thank you to Africa CEO Forum for having such a diverse panelists. So thank you all for